So here we are, 1785. All right? Somewhere up north in the river town of Hartford, they're debating what to call this collection of folks that want to turn their village into a city, and they just decide Bristol. Don't quite know why. There's some theories. They decide Bristol. Meanwhile, let's jet over to Torrington, the woods, and you've got a baby being born. So we are that, you are that baby. You open your eyes in a colonial farm in Torrington. And we're going to wear the habit of the character right now, okay? That's how this is going to work. And the first thing that you feel when you're born is the warmth of a fire in the house. Because that's how you got warm. Because the second thing you feel probably is the chill that's outside the house, or the drafts. Because these were houses made of wood. And outside those wooden walls was a dark, cold forest. And then probably the next thing that you feel, being born in that small colonial farmhouse in Torrington, is the people around you, the family, the faces. And as you open your eyes over the next couple of years, you begin to see where you're from. And you're from a farm. You're from the woods. You're from a small, maybe 1 or 2 room house, chimney in the center, that gives you warmth. It's also your stove. It's also where you cook. It's also where you burn your trash. In the winter times, you're cooped up. In the summer times, you get to explore. That is your world. And outside of that house, there are a couple other houses scattered around this village in the middle of the woods in middle Connecticut. And that is all you will see for probably the first 10 years of your life. That woods, that house, handful of other wooden houses that look just like yours. In the front yard, piles of wood, piles of chopped blocks, because that's all you've got. That is the defining characteristic of the civilization, of the organization, of the communities, of that area, right here, where we're standing, about 1785 plus. And as you grow up there, you're going to hear about maybe some exciting places. Because what's the first thing that the children love to do? They like to hear stories. They get bored with playing in the woods, maybe playing around their house. They say, tell me stories. Tell me the family stories. Tell me the stories of the other families here. It's a small place, everyone knows each other. So you hear about how the ships first came, brought the early settlers, how they started the river towns. The river towns expanded. The folks kept going farther and further into the woods and started other communities. You hear about the frontier wars, times when people were scared to leave their house, go out in groups because there was just a lot of conflict. You hear about times of starvation, the hardships of the winters. You didn't have a safety net like we've got today back then. You were dependent almost on climate to furnish you enough food and supplies that you might stockpile to survive the winter. Now, yeah, the people that came over on ships, they also sent stuff on ships, raw materials. This was what was interesting about the New World, is you weren't alone, per se. There are folks from all over the world, England notably, that would ship stuff and that would come into some port on the East Coast, that would come over on a wagon into the woods, and you'd have access to those materials. Some interesting things, right? Metals. Things you just don't find in the woods, but you might need to make living in the woods a little easier. So you had that faraway market, that supply chain coming in. But that didn't always make sure every family was going to make it through the tough times. You heard about the Revolution. War stories, exciting stories for kids, right? Of the redcoats, of the participants that left from your woods, from your community, to faraway places to fight, to come back. Some didn't. And those exciting stories. And then you heard about the expansion that took place when the war was over. The just unlimited sense of freedom, of independence, of realizing personal wealth in some instances, to build beyond what was just in your community. So there you are, motivated by all of this. Bottle it all up, right? And the next thing you do is you get a call to go to the War of 1812. British are back, let's go. And you're thinking to yourself, this is going to be my time to have some stories to share with my kids. So you get there, and you're assigned a regiment, and you're deployed, and the British are coming, you're on the coast, and in this case, the person that you are, you're in Old Saybrook, and you're given a rifle, and you're given some dusty clothes, and you're sleeping in a barn around the pew of a church, and they tell you the British are coming, you just sit there in that harbor and you wait and watch if they come. And you are bored, Because for your deployment in Old Saybrook in 1812, ready to fight, ready to get some war stories, the British never came. They didn't. So you go home a little bit disillusioned with the excitement that comes with shouldering some of the, let's say, war-fighting lifestyle. So then you look at yourself and you say, well, if I can't be a soldier, and I'm already a farmer, well, what can I do next? And the thing about this new country is that there isn't someone there telling you what to do next. You have the freedom to explore. In some ways, in feudal systems, you're given your employment by your family heritage. You have one destiny only, and that is the destiny that your ancestors did, and that you are then in the hopper to do. And diverting from that is really not encouraged, nor is it in some societies allowed in the old world. But in the new world, you can have 1,000 destinies. You can do anything. And all the materials are there for you to be more than just, in this case, a farmer. So you decide maybe there's something more out there. You traveled a little bit as a soldier, but now you're back on the farm, and someone tells you, you could be a maker. See all these woods? You can harness the power of these woods to make things. And the things that you make could then go on to profit you. Because there is a profit motive here. Business. The business of America is business, they say, right? So here you are a maker, and you start as a farmer, and now someone puts a tool in your hand and says, with this tool, you are empowered now to make things. And you take this tool and become a carpenter. And for some years you pass in the carpentry trade, probably an apprentice. After that, you get a call, because you're doing well, working hard. Hey, we need folks to come over to Arlington and put up a steeple. Well, here's a progression. I've just taken myself from a farmer to a carpenter, and now I'm going to be a steeple raiser. So then you go and you learn the trade of joining. I mean, there were no, nails were a rarity back then. So you really know how to work with wood to build things. So you raise that steeple, and you say, what's next? Because in this country, right, this new country, it's up to you what's next. So you look around and you say, well, what's something that everybody needs that I could probably build? A wagon. So you become a wagon builder in Torrington. You become the best wagon builder in Torrington, then you have a problem. The problem is, you told all the families in Torrington, when I build you a wagon, it's going to last you 30 years. And now you can't sell a wagon for 30 years because they all bought your wagon. So you need what? A new market. So you go down to the Torrington community, gossip hall, wherever that is, maybe someone's house. You say, well, where's the next market? Sold a wagon to everybody in Torrington, probably the town over. And someone says, well, you know, Bristol, this new community, sounds like a pretty good place to sell a wagon. I hear it's a growing community. So, well, I don't know anyone in Bristol. Well, as you know, there's a guy, Dr. Titus. He owes me something. He came here and I gave him, he was hungry, I gave him some salted pork to go home, and so he owes me a credit. And back then, people don't have credit cards or even paper currency, right? It was all ledgers, credit. You had a book, when someone came for something, you'd write down what they gave you, and they'd sign it and you'd sign it, and that was a favor owed to you. So here you are looking for an in into the Bristol market, and luckily your neighbor here is owed a favor by the doctor. So you say, great, get on your wagon, get on over to Bristol. Now, that takes all day, right? I mean, Torrington to Bristol these days, pretty quick. But there, you had to wake up early, because it's a day trip. You didn't know anyone in Bristol, you don't want to stay over. There might be some sketchy characters there, you don't want to get way late on the way home, so you want daylight hours. So you are up, even before dawn, because you know the roads, right, around Torrington. So you can start when it's dark. Get to daylight, you're figuring in your head, okay, muddy roads maybe, good time of year to go. I can probably see Mr. Titus, 10-minute meeting, get back to Torrington in my bed by dark. So you don't want to be out there. Well, that's not how it works out. You get to Bristol, coming up these hills in the wagon, you get to Dr. Titus's house, and he's not home, because he's out seeing patients. You got a problem, right? So you say, well, what should I do here? Well, the person in the house says, you can wait up at the tavern. Great idea, right? Everyone loves waiting at taverns. So, back in the day, if you were a legitimate, let's say, community of the woods of Connecticut, you needed 4 things. You needed a green, you needed a church, you needed a school, and of course, the tavern, which was the source of just about all entertainment and news back in the day. So you roll up to the Abel Lewis Tavern right up here. You walk up the front steps and it creaks a little bit, and you hear the sounds inside of all the people, and you go into the door and you got two directions you can go to. Because back then the taverns, they had probably two rooms on the first, fireplace in each room, right? And you look in one room, you got a fireplace here with benches by the fireplace. There were no tables, there was a bench by the fireplace, kitchen in the back, and they just bring you out what you want, right? So you look at one room, fireplace, looks a little bit too rambunctious, too many Bristolites there. So then you look in the other room, maybe a few scattered people, and you just sit there. And you sit, and you wait, and they give you some cider. You don't want to get to the hard cider yet, which is your only other option maybe. But you get some cider. You wait, and you wait, and you wait, and you wait. And you can't really get an update of where Mr. Titus is, right? So you just wait. Finally, pokes his head in. I'm looking for someone who's looking for me. He says your name. Right here. Stands up, you show him your book that was signed, the credit owed. Verifies that's his signature. Yep, that's right. I bought some pork salt, and now I gotta meet my credit. So he says, what's wrong with you? I'm a doctor. What can I do for you? And you tell him, I'm out of clients. He said, I thought there was something wrong. I'm a doctor. What do you want me to do about it? I'm out of business. I'm out of clients. What do you want me to do about it? Well, someone told me, Dr. Titus, you had connections in Bristol. If I was going to enter this new market, I needed to talk to somebody that can get me in this market. And then his face changes a little bit. Because he knows. He knows about his other life. Because when you're a doctor, when you're a professional tradesman in Bristol at the time, you have a lot of spare capacity for other ventures. So Dr. Titus wasn't just a doctor, he was an investor. And everyone knew Dr. Titus could get you in a business and help keep you there in Bristol at the time. So the doctor asked a couple questions about, what do you make wagons? You a good wagon maker? I hope so. Make so many wagons I can't sell any more because they don't break. And he says to himself, well, this is exactly the type of person we need in Bristol. A wagon maker. Because there's something else we do here that's quite profitable. And if I invest in you, I'm going to want you to do this thing. And you say, well, I know how to make wagons. I spent all these years getting good at making wagons. And I'm going to come to Bristol and make something different? That doesn't sound very like a good investment to me. And the doctor says, how about this? You come to Bristol and you start making wagons. And after some time, you come see me. And we'll start making this other thing. Wagons, they got wheels. Made of wood. Just take those wheels, shrink them down, move them around, and you can make this other thing. And this other thing will not only take you to the next level of your craft, but it could transform you into something you never even thought about. And so that is kind of an interesting way to think about where you are right now. You are presumably born into a new country with new opportunities, new markets. And the opportunity that you are now looking at and experiencing firsthand is a transformative opportunity. And one tenet, I think, of what we see repeated over the history of Bristol is that the opportunity that you can have, particularly in this community, is transformative. Meaning that it's not just doing more of the same business, but that you can almost transform from one destiny to another. So Dr. Titus points up there on the wall and he says, can you make that for me? And if you can, you're going to do good business in Bristol. What do you think he pointed at? This is what he pointed at. This is a 200-year-old clock that was made by Boardman, maybe 12 blocks from here, in a barn. And what's unique about these Bristol clocks is that they had interchangeable parts, something we learned from a long time ago. So how many of you have actually explored one of these things? Maybe not a bunch. So what we're going to do, as the good doctor showed his future investor or workman, is we're going to get this clock working. So I do need some help here. Someone to hold this.
Sean.
Sounds like Sean.
You don't have to go anywhere, just hold it, just hold it. Okay. What does that look like? So I'm going to hold this. And this is the most important part of the, make sure it doesn't fall, the verge. Front row, you know? Because the hazard's in the front row. All right, so here we go. Let's take the clothes off. First thing you do. It's okay. It's only 200 years old. Minute hand. Hour hand. Are you ready? This was painted, like we said, a long time ago, probably by someone that worked in a barn right up here. And there it is. The inside of a 200-year-old Bristol clock, which is the mainstay of the industry that was transformative in this town. So the key here, in and of itself, anyone can make this with simple tools. The templates, you can get at the clock museum up the street. Metal, as we know, a little bit of metal imported from abroad. But the reason that this is wood is because brass was embargoed by Britain and very difficult to get. So we used, we being Dr. Titus and his crew, wood gears because that's what we had on hand. So that required more seasoning, a number of other improvements. We're not going to get too much into the clockenomics, the whole thing. That's for a different episode. But right here, we got to put this thing back together. So, if somebody, I got to rely on my brother back here in the back, can you get me the box that has the gloves on top of it? All right, and this is how things arrived, in pieces. It's not back in the day where you had one clock handmade by one person, and if it broke, you had to go back to that person. If they weren't around, they were out of town, you're out of luck. These are interchangeable, right? So these weights is the power. Without these weights, is it going to tick? No, it isn't. Next. Probably need, well, let's get the power. Get the power hooked up? Let's get the power hooked up. Here we go. Ooh, it's moving, folks. And the power also will help stabilize it. There we go. All right, look it up. It's not moving right. Okay. Who has the long stick that wags? Now, could you find this in the West Woods? No. This is, again, some of the metal that you needed. Stolen or bought to get this thing working. Before we put it on, we had to combine it with something else to make the magic happen. Who has the verge? There we go. They call this country mechanics because everything you need to make this thing tick was in the woods. Or it could be made in the woods using simple tools. So we're going to slip this down here, and it slips right into a little... First we're going to hang the verge. I'll show you in a second. Delicate pieces, but if you'll notice, the design of the whole thing was so that it could survive a pretty rough wagon trip. What am I missing?
They're hanging down.
Go ahead, Peter, hang it very carefully. I'm going to do that. Oh, oh! There we go. Okay? delicate to put this back on, the minute. Let's at least put the hour back on. Yeah, we'll see. That's 3 o'clock time. So this is how this genius of country mechanics worked, which again, was not invented here, but one could say perfected here. Is you'd start this whole pendulum, and the cadence, or the equal parts of the time, would be kept by the verge and the movement, as we saw in the trailer, of the escape wheel. And the purpose of this escape wheel was to make sure that every time it went from the left to the right, it had equal left and equal right. And that's what gave you accurate time. All right? But that's not exciting enough. Best part is when it goes ding. So this is called the great wheel. And you'll notice the great wheel is not evenly notched. You've got more notches this way, and they're spaced out a little bit more here. Why is that? You're going to see. So I'm going to cheat, if that's okay. We're going to get this thing to go ding. I want you to watch that escape wheel ticker. Hold on. Oh, I got to release the escape wheel. Here, ready to get double time on this escape wheel? Here we go. Pretty cool, because you don't have any other power than some dead weights down here. So it rang 3 times. Why? Because that's the space between those 2 notches. But let's say it went beyond that time. We want to get to the next hour here. There we go. Look at that go again. Right? So this device, while it may have been created in other parts of the world using metal, the fact that you made it here in wood, using trees you got from around the parts in Bristol, okay? So lots of people could do this. Lots of people could make this, paint it, put it on the market. But what we did here, in this part, was something they didn't do anywhere else in the world. I made this, I sold it to you. When it breaks, you gotta call me. Interchangeable parts. So when this broke, guess what we did? We interchanged the parts. So how does it work? Well, you gotta take all the stuff off that you just put on. Okay? Let's take off the opens here. Here we go. Up close with a relic of Bristol history. Here it is. And you, all of you here. If I can get it out just fine. We're going to hold it. And there it is. The wooden wheels, cherry wood. Back of which, cheap pine, punched template. Front of which has all the good stuff, right? The expensive stuff. You got the escape wheel. Rare metal. Didn't come from around here, so you got to buy it. The great wheel. And the ticker. There's real names to these things, but go with me for the moment. But most importantly inside, look at that. Gears. Gears, gears, gears. And each inventor, in some ways, had different gears there. So, I might have my assistant again. In the backpack is another box. What I'm going to do is leave this up here so everyone can look at it afterwards. So my clock broke, right?
So you're saying a wagon maker.
But then he wasn't a wagon maker anymore. What was that? All right, so my clock broke. I'm in the middle of the woods. What am I gonna do? All right. Well, I can take it to the expensive repair shop, or I can get my, I don't know what Amazon was at the time, but my delivery here. And what just came for Christmas? Look at that. Interchangeable parts. And these wood gears, unlike that one, have all the right teeth.
You got them from Amazon?
eBay.
No, really?
Yeah. And so this just will go right in, right there. Hook everything back up, and you just got your clock fixed, right? So this here is not just an innovation, because the innovation was done probably someplace else over a much longer time. But this here, this whole system, what I just sold you, that's what came from Bristol. The ability to give you time. Not just time as a luxury, as something that works sometimes, work that doesn't. But I just gave you a system to keep time in your house that is what everyone needs, reliable. Because if something breaks you don't quite understand, interchangeable part, someone will come and fix it real quick. And so it can't be useful, this whole clock thing in the beginning. It can't be useful if it's just an ornament. It has to be useful if it's reliable. To run a business, you do need an understanding, if not a little bit of influence of time. But it's not useful if it doesn't run, right? Everyone loves a car, needs a car, but if it doesn't run, what's the point? Reliable time. So why, and as we wrap this up here, well, why Bristol? Why can't I just do this in Torrington, where I'm from? Power. Water power. To cut all this wood, to cut these pieces, you need machines, which are powered by belts, which are tied to the ceiling, which go over there, which go down into a river of some kind. And Bristol had hills. And hills give you gravity. And every place has water. And gravity and water together make rivers. And rivers flowing through, if you can capture them right, give you power. Mills. Water power, saw power, these things. And so unlike some other towns, maybe had just one river, two, remember, if you have a finite resource, it's usually controlled by a finite number of people. In Bristol, you had so much access to water power that you could be a small shop and get started without owing too much credit to anyone else. And that ability to get in at the bottom in an industry that was not growing, but also valuable and reliable, gave Bristol that magic pixie dust of the original expansion. So, to wrap this up of episode 1, go home thinking this is my future. I'm no longer a farmer, no longer a carpenter, no longer a wagon maker. I am a soon-to-be clockmaker. After some time with your wagon shop here in the north end of Bristol, Dr. Titus pays you another visit, and he says, I see you've done well for yourself as a wagon maker. Have you thought about my offer to be a clockmaker? And you say, yes, sir, I am. So he says, the thing about clocks is you need an edge, because what I just told you, anyone else here can do, and everyone else here is doing. So for you to get in on this interchangeable part clock business, you really want to succeed and beat out these other guys, because it was competitive. You can't just have a nice case and hope that the case sells better than the rest. You can't just figure out the cost of all these little parts here and figure, oh, if I just save on this little piece here, I'll sell a clock for $1 less. You need an edge. An edge in business, especially when you're starting out. And so he asked the doctor, he said, you seem to me, you may know where I can find an edge to this whole thing. And so he tells you something that has changed your life. He tells you that there is an inventor in Bristol who is considered the most ingenious inventor of clocks ever, widely recognized. And that if you are able to tap into the knowledge of this guy, he will give you that edge. And you say, well, is he just going to give it to me? I mean, that's not how usually these things work. You need to offer some sort of transaction, some incentive. And the doctor tells you, looks you in the eye and says, well, I'll tell you this. This inventor, this genius, really good at making clocks, not so good at selling them or the business side of things. So right now, this guy, he's in jail down in New York. And he needs somebody to go bail him out. And he doesn't quite have a lot of friends around here. So I figure, if you go down to New York with some of that extra cash you got from your wagon business, and you offer to bail this guy out, you can cut him a deal. I'll bail you out. And you work with me to make some kind of new clock. You invent something that gives me an edge. And with that, Dr. Titus gave John Burge the mission to go down to Brooklyn, New York, and bail out Joseph Ives. The end of episode 1. A preview of episode 2, titled, as you might imagine, The Bailout. I'll give you a piece, all right? So, I mean, there's gonna be more, but let's speed it up. So you're there. Ives is behind bars. Debtor's prison, right? I mean, it's only one way to get out, pay off your debtors. And John Burge shows up and says, I'm here to bail you out. Here's my deal. Here's this. Well, have you ever heard of genius to listen to logic? What Burge is surprised to see when he makes this, what seems to be a reasonable offer. I get you out of jail, right? Unless you would be here. You come back with me and just do what you keep loving to do, make clocks. I mean, Joseph Ives spits in his face and says, I'm never going back to Bristol. And that's when Burge gets his first taste of local politics. Because what Joseph Ives says is, every time I'm in Bristol, there's someone trying to steal my invention. You've got shopkeepers like the Mitchells and the Barnes. They're only out to dominate the market and build their empires. You've got other clockmakers like the Manrosses. They'll make clocks one day, they'll make something else the next day, buttons, whatever keeps them profitable. You've got a doctor like Dr. Marion. He says he's a doctor. He'll put, thorns in your boot to get you a credit or two on his ledger, and then he's going to tax you for it. I'm never going back to Bristol. Why are you here? What are you? Are you a shopkeeper? Are you a creditor, investor? What is it, John Burge, that you're about? And John Burge has to think about it for a second. And he's going to tell him something that convinces the human side of Joseph Ives to come with him. And he's going to say, well, I was born a farmer, but what I really love to do is make things. And so if you come with me, I'll get you out of jail, and we're going to go make clocks. And we're going to make clocks with an edge. And the clocks we make are going to be a little bit more special than all these other clocks out there. And if you can think about it back then, that probably made more sense to John Burge and Joseph Ives than the other deal of a credit one side or a credit the other. And so that day, a wagon pulled up to the Brooklyn jail, and Joseph Ives came walking out front. Thank you, Mr. Burge, for paying all my debts. He said, I didn't pay your debts, I just paid your bail. So get in the wagon before the debtors come find you. We got to get back to Bristol. And there they scooted out of New York City, far away, back to what was then the village, not the city, not the woods, but the village of Bristol. All right.
All right.
You've got one element left to this. Bristol at one point had a high density of secret societies. I'm not saying you're all a part of it or even not, but I do need assistance from one Mr. Tony Brown. So Matt, do you mind in the back if you go and open up that blue case and give that to one Mr. O'Brien there, and I might need to hand it. There you go.
Thank you, Matt.
Perfect timing. Look at that. Perfect timing. Here we go, boys. Well, we all want to know what's in the case, right? So, at the beginning of episode 1, I said, if I remember correctly, that a farmer was empowered by a tool to become more than a farmer, right? Remember that part of the story? And I also said that clocks at the time could be made by one person with simple tools. And I also said that the Westwoods was transformed into a city of inventors. And inventors, they need tools. And so what was that tool that when it reached the hands of John Burge, inspired him to stop farming and start making? Something that you needed if you're going to work with wood. Iron, steel, wood, something that didn't exist at the beginning, parts that were imported, and in some ways to our story we're going to find out have multiple, I guess, destinies as well. So that there is all you need to make this here, if you know what you're doing. The end.